very, very much. You'll probably be able to detect from my accent that I've spent much of my childhood in Africa. And one of the things which I love about Africa, one of the many things which I love about Africa is Africans, we love to tell stories. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you a few stories about swimming in the most extreme environments on this earth and how I've tried to use sport to convey a message to our world leaders. So let's start with the first story. This is a photograph of the Maldives. These are the lowest lying islands in the world. The majority of these islands are less than half a meter in height. As the polar regions now are beginning to melt, sea levels are rising, this country is beginning to disappear. A few years ago, I was at a discussion between the former president of the Maldives and the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, his neighboring country, where he was attempting to purchase a piece of his neighboring country to move his people as and when his country disappears. He's a modern-day Noah. And here's the hard inequity of it. The people of the Maldives have done virtually nothing to cause climate change, but now they face it on a daily basis. And so I decided to go and do a swim across the whole country, from island to island to island, to draw attention to what is going to be happening to these people. So the very first person I telephoned was a former general in the British Army called General Sewell, and I called him up. It was early January, and I said, General Sewell, would you please come with me to the Maldives and second me, help me during this swim? Well, it was early January, and it was obviously raining in Britain, and so it didn't take a long telephone conversation to persuade him to come with me to the Maldives. And so we arrived in the Maldives, and then we started the swim across this whole country. And so I swam for day after day after day. I'll never forget the first day, because on the first day I dived into the Indian Ocean. It was 32 degrees centigrade. Okay, underneath me is this beautiful turquoise blue, descending down to this rich royal blue. There's a coral reef which extends for 10 kilometers to the next atoll. Underneath me are these beautiful tropical fish, blue, green, purple, yellow, magnificent. A small shark is underneath me. As I said, I swam for day after day after day, till we got to day 8. And on day 8, I start swimming towards the next island, and suddenly the general does this to me. I put my head out the water, I say, what is it? He says, Lewis, tread water, we've got a problem. The rudder on the back of the boat is stuck, and because it's stuck, I can't steer this boat. So he jumps into the water, and he's heaving, and he's pulling, and he's pushing at this rudder, but it's completely stuck. And so the captain of the boat jumps in, and he's helping him, heaving and pulling, and I'm helping them. And eventually we realize we're actually not going to be able to fix this. This rudder is completely stuck. So we all climb onto the boat. We sit there, and the general gets onto the radio to try and get somebody to come and rescue us. As he's on the radio, I realize that we're now in a strong current. And I'm looking over there, and I can see a coral reef. If we don't fix this problem fairly soon, we've still got a bit of time. If we don't fix this problem, we're also going to be a shipwreck. He puts the radio down, and then behind him, I can see an island, and behind that island, I can see a boat. So the general says, I don't know what on earth we're going to do now. I said, can you see that yacht over there? He said, yes. Now, I had heard that Roman Abramovich owned a yacht in the Maldives. Now, for those of you who perhaps don't know who Roman Abramovich is, he's a Russian, he's a billionaire, he owns Chelsea Football Club in England. And so I said to the general, imagine if that is Roman Abramovich's yacht over there. And he sails past us now and he says, lads, let me take care of this. Why don't you use my yacht? You know, dreams are for free. The general says to me, give me your mobile phone. I say, what? He says, give me your mobile phone. So he treats me like I'm one of his soldiers. So I handed him my mobile phone and I listened to one of the most extraordinary telephone conversations I've ever heard in my whole life. He telephones London. He telephones a young lady who is the marketing manager, the sponsor. And this is the way the telephone conversation goes. He says, her name was Victoria. Victoria, he says, it's Timothy here. I'm in a spot of trouble. I wonder if you can please help me. What I need you to do, Victoria, is I need you please to telephone the manager of Chelsea Football Club and ask the manager of Chelsea Football Club to please call Roman Abramovich and ask him if that is his yacht over there behind that island at this grid reference, would he please immediately start it up and come and rescue us? Can you imagine what I'm thinking? I'm thinking, yeah, let's see this happen. Less than half an hour later, we see the engine of the boat start up. It starts steaming towards us at full pace. It's, as you can imagine, it's a large yacht. On the front is a place to put your helicopter. On the back is a place to put your second helicopter. On the front is a Danish captain. He screams out across the water, I have just received a telephone call from Mr. John Mann, who is Roman Abramovich's number 2 in Moscow. I have been instructed to hand you this yacht. Gentlemen, where would you like to go? Well, we had three magnificent days in the Maldives. I finished the swim as quickly as I could. There was huge amounts of media attention. Everybody was absolutely delighted, except one person. Who was that? That was me. I'll tell you the reason why. Because for the last 50 kilometers of that swim, all I was asking myself was, Lewis, why did you not pick up the telephone and call Roman Abramovich? Why did you deep down in your stomach not believe that Roman Abramovich would help you? Where did that limiting belief actually come from? And that's the dangerous thing about limiting beliefs. And that is that sometimes we have them and we don't even realize that we have them. So later on, we're sailing back to the main capital, Male, and I walk up to the general and I said to him, General, did you honestly believe that Roman would come and, he's now Roman to us, that Mr. Abramovich would actually come and rescue us? He said something to me, which to me was illuminating and transformational. He said, Lewis, he said, I'm a lot older than you are. At the time, he was 69 years old. He said, I'm a lot older than you are, and this may sound like real nonsense, but I have always gone throughout my life honestly believing that every single person wants to help me. How empowering is that type of mindset? Because so many times we think that people don't want to help us, when actually it can often be the complete opposite. Which brings me to the second story. At the end, I'll bring all the stories together. This is a photograph of Lake Imja. Now, this never ever used to be Lake Imja. This used to be the Imja Glacier. The glacier, The glacier is over here. 30 years ago, it was over here. But because of climate change, it's melted all the way this distance. That's 2 kilometers. It's melted, okay? I wanted to go into the Himalayas. I wanted to go onto Mount Everest and do a swim on Mount Everest. You shouldn't be able to do a swim on Mount Everest, but now because the glaciers are melting in the Himalayas, you can actually go do swims in newly formed lakes high up in the Himalayas. This area is a cocktail for conflict. This is not just about ice melting. This is about people's livelihoods going. You imagine you're a farmer, you're at the bottom of the Ganges River, and every single year you're getting less and less water. You're going to start getting very angry with those people upstream who are using that limited water supply. Or imagine if you're a normal household in New Delhi and you've got to wait every single morning next to a truck to be able to get water. As I say, this area is a cocktail for conflict. And so I decided to go and do a swim on Mount Everest. So I climbed up to this lake here. I dived in. I swam around for about 8 minutes. No problem at all. And so the leader of the expedition, who was again this British Army general, said, come on, let's go up onto Mount Everest. And so we climbed for another 3 days until in front of us was this big lake on the Khumbu Glacier. I'm there with my team. And the way I swim in cold water is I always dive in. You can't walk up to cold water and sort of put your toe in and think, okay, I'm going to go for a swim. You've got to throw yourself in and you have to swim crawl. You've got to swim fast and aggressively to generate the heat. So my coach is there, and that's the way I've swum for 28 years. My coach is there. He says, okay, Lewis, are you ready? I say, I'm ready. He goes, 3, 2, 1. I dive into this lake and I start swimming across it as quickly as I can. In less than 30 seconds, I realized I had huge problems. I just couldn't breathe. I'm gasping for air. We're at 5.5 kilometers above sea level, which is the approximate height of the top of Kilimanjaro. And then something happened, which we hadn't anticipated at all, and which hadn't happened during this test swim. And that was, I literally had no strength to even turn my arms. I was so exhausted. I couldn't hold my legs on the surface of the water. My whole body starts dragging like this. I said to myself, don't stop, Lewis, don't stop. I'm trying to get through this water. And luckily this lake was very, very shallow, because on 2 occasions I went under. I was able to push myself up. I kept on breathing. I said, keep on going. Until from the corner of my goggles, I see the general screaming at me to get out the water. I swim towards the edge. He grabs me. He pulls me out. He said, Lewis, it's all over. He said, I'm so sorry. He said, if I allow you to carry on with this swim, you could quite easily drown here. I'll never, ever be able to find your body. And so he walks me off the mountain all the way down to this little village called Gorakshep. We put up our tents, And there we spent 3 days getting more oxygen into our bodies. At the end of the 3 days, the general walks up to me and says, "Lewis, would you like to have another go at this swim?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I feared that was going to be the case." He said, "If you want to have another go at this swim, you need to take a radical tactical shift." I said, "What?" He said, "A radical tactical shift." He says, "Why are you trying to swim so quickly?" I said, "General, 2 years ago, I tried to swim across the North Pole. I was in the water was minus 1.7. I was in the water for 18 minutes. I couldn't feel my left hand for about 4 months. I'm trying to swim as quickly as I can to generate the heat." He looks to me and he says to me, he says, "Lewis," he said, "this water's warm." I said to him, "It's 2 degrees. He said, "Stop being fussy." He said, "This water is warm. I know that you can handle this temperature water. You swim in colder water. The issue here is lack of oxygen." He said, "What I suggest you do is the following. Instead of swimming as quickly as you can, I want you to swim as slowly as you can." And I mean that. That sounds really crazy. I want you to swim as slowly as you can. He said, "Instead of swimming crawl, I want you to start swimming breaststroke, and then you can breathe whenever you want to." But he said, "The biggest change I need to see in you, Lewis, is instead of swimming with all this aggression, I need you to swim with real humility." And he pointed up to Everest and he said, "Lewis, you cannot bully Mount Everest." We spent another day there, and then we started to walk back up that mountain until finally we were back next to that lake where I had nearly drowned 3 days previously. This is all I can remember about that swim. You'll see in the front of that picture, those bubbles. That is me desperately trying to get to the edge where the general pulled me out. I'm there 3 days later, and all I can think of is, if I go too quickly, I'm going to drown. If I go too slowly, I can lose fingers or toes. I've got to get this timing perfect. I've heard some people say that drowning is the most peaceful death. Where do people come with these type of comments from? I'm absolutely petrified. And one of my Sherpas can see I'm frightened. He says, "Come over here, Lewis, come over here. There's a big rock over here." He says, "I just want you to sit down here and I want you to relax." And then he put up these beautiful little prayer flags. He put some incense on the ground. He lit it. The two of us just sat there and we watched this team of Sherpas climbing up through the clouds to the highest point on this earth, and it was just very, very peaceful. And then I felt confident. I stood up. I slowly got into the water. I start swimming across this lake. For the first 250 meters, there's no problem. For the next 250 meters, there's also no problem. We then get to 600 meter mark, and suddenly I'm feeling really cold. I get to the 700 meter mark, I'm absolutely frozen. I get to the 750 meter mark, I think, if I don't switch right now into crawl and sprint the last 250 meters, I'm going to die on this mountain. I'm just about to go into crawl, and from the edge of my goggles, I can see this Sherpa jumping over the rocks, despite the altitude, and screaming at me. I put my head out the water, and all I can hear Sanjeep saying is, "Slower, Lewis, slower, slower." And I swam the last agonizing 250 meters until I finally got to the end. He grabbed me, he pulled me out the water. He gave me this most enormous hug and a kiss. The general was there. He walked up to me, he gave me a handshake and no kiss. We learnt, there's a picture of General Sewell there with his arm around me, and there's young Sanjeep over there in the orange. We learnt 2 really, really important lessons there on the mountain. The first one is obvious, and that is, just because something has worked in the past does not necessarily mean it's going to work today. The second lesson, it's also about change. That is, you can change your speed, you can change your stroke, but for effective change to take place, we have to be prepared to completely change our mindsets. Which brings me to the third story. This is a photograph. If I had 1 day left on this earth, this is where I would spend it. If you sail for 11 days from the bottom of New Zealand, south across the Southern Ocean, eventually you will get to here. This area is called the Ross Sea. It's the most pristine ecosystem left on this planet. It is the last great wilderness left on this planet. And when you get there, it is like arriving in the Garden of Eden. In the bottom right of that picture, you'll see these little Adelie penguins, this high, absolutely gorgeous. But you've also got big penguins. These are the emperor penguins. They come up to about here on you. They've got the white chests. They've got the gold bow ties. They've never seen humans. They walk up to you, and then they want to put their little nose, their beak inside your pocket. They're absolutely gorgeous. And when I go for a swim, you imagine having these animals underneath you like torpedoes, and behind you all these bubbles. The thing I like about penguins, the thing I love about penguins, is that penguins are like humans. When I walk into a penguin colony, every single one of them has got their own personality. Some of them, early in the morning, are really grumpy. Some of them are really happy. Some of them are thieves. They're always stealing, and some of them are always chasing the female penguins all the way around the thing. It's just amazing to see them. But this place isn't just about penguins. It's also got Weddell seals. These animals dive to 600 meters. This area is absolutely incredible. The problem with this area is that this is the last place on this earth with bountiful supplies of fish. And the fish down there is called the Antarctic toothfish. And what's happened is that all the oceans have been so overfished that the great big fishing companies now are going down to Antarctica and catching this fish, okay? They sell it here in Europe, they sell it in America, and you know what they do? They call it Chilean sea bass. So they change the name so that it sounds more appetizing for people to eat. When you're eating this stuff, you are destroying this environment because this is the main predator species. You take out the Chilean sea bass, you take out the Antarctic toothfish, and everything underneath it is absolutely going to die. And so I decided to go down there and to do a series of swims in this place to try and urge the world leaders to protect it. Now, there are 25 countries who govern the waters around Antarctica. Of those countries, 23 have agreed to protect this place. 2 have decided that they don't think that we should protect this place. These 2 countries are China and Russia. And I felt so strongly about it that I decided I'm going to go down there, I'm going to do these swims, and then I'm going to go to Russia and try and urge them, and to China, and try and urge them to protect this place. So I sailed all the way down there, and when I arrived in the Ross Sea, I have never, ever experienced swimming conditions like this. When we arrived there, the water is -1, but the air temperature is -37. I got my wife to get into a small boat and go along the edge of the ice to make sure that there were no killer whales in the water. As she put the boat down into the water, I saw a wave hit up against the side of the boat, and I saw water spray up, and it turned into ice mid-air and whacked up against my wife. She then came back, she came onto the boat, she took off all her clothing so she could talk to me. She said, "Lewis, we're ready." You know, it's the moments which challenge us the most, which define us. This is a photograph of me going out to start the swim. And you can see on the edge of this boat here, as the water hits up against it, it actually turns into ice. I got into my clothes, and then I started this swim along the edge of the Ross Sea. And I swam, and I swam, and I swam until I could swim not another centimeter. And I was completely finished. Completely finished. I got in the boat, and then I went to Argentina, and from Argentina I went to South Africa. And from there I went to Russia. And when I got to South Africa, I got a telephone call. And it was from a man called Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who in 1984 won the Nobel Peace Prize. He said, "Lewis," he said, "I want you to come to my house because I would like, please, to tell you about what I think you should do." So we agreed to meet. His house is next to the beach. And so we met down on the beach in Cape Town. He said something to me which was so special. He said, "You know, Lewis," he said, "what the wonderful thing about South Africa is that we're a truly multicultural society. We've got blacks, we've got whites, we've got Indians, we've got Chinese, we've got Jews, we've got Christians, we've got Muslims, we've got every single type of person on this planet here." And he said, "But what we learnt during apartheid was that truth is not absolute." I said to Archbishop Tutu, I said, "What do you mean by that?" He said, "Lewis, the way one person from one group sees something and the way another person from another group sees the exact same thing can be completely opposite. And what we learnt in apartheid was that for us, the most important thing was to listen to the dialogue of the other side. And when we did that, we realized there was far more which united us than that which divided us. He said, I want you to go to Russia. I want you to argue with passion. But I do need you, Lewis, when you go to China, when you go to Russia, I need you, please, to listen to their dialogue and find the common ground. And so I flew then to Moscow. I arrived there. And for 4 days, I did media, day after day after day, but none of the leaders would meet me. Until finally, I got a telephone call. It was a man called Slava Fetisov, who used to be the captain of the Soviet ice hockey team, 2 Olympic gold medals, Russia's greatest hero. He called me up. He said, Lewis, I'd like you please to come and meet the Russian Minister of Defense, the second most powerful person in Russia. He's the person who governs Antarctica and the Arctic for the Russians. I want you to tell him your story. And it's amazing. I've now been going there many times now to tell them about what's happening down in Antarctica and to ask them to help preserve this place. I now shuttle between America and Moscow, between Washington and Moscow, trying to get these 2 parties to come closer together. And we're very, very close to having this area protected. And if we get this right, this will be the biggest protected area on the planet. It'll be the size of Britain, France, and Germany all put together. But what have these 3 lessons got in common? Very, very simple. The first lesson, what was that about? Yeah, that was about swimming across the Maldives. But it was a story about limiting beliefs. I see so many limiting beliefs when it comes to protecting the environment. We need to push them away. We need to push them away. The second story, what was that about? That was about climbing Everest, but underlying it was a story about a radical tactical shift. We stand at a monumental moment in the history of this world. We need to take that shift. But the last story, what was that about? Well, yes, that's about swimming in the Ross Sea, but underlying it is a story about us all having to listen to each other, listen to the dialogue, and find the common ground. And when we do that, we will solve the climate change crisis. It's really that simple. Ladies and gentlemen, I've run over my time, but thank you all very, very much for listening to me. Thank you.